And I'm going to start us with just some brief housekeeping. First of all, the webinar is being recorded, just so you're aware of that, and it will be posted to YouTube following the webinar. Live captioning is available. I just posted the link where you can access the captioning in the chat box, and I'll continue to post that link as more folks join us. Our presenter today is going to open it up for Q&A and discussion after her presentation. So we're really excited to have a participatory event today. And so when we open it up, we encourage you to unmute yourself, turn on your video, and engage with us. And however, while she's speaking, we do ask that you keep yourselves muted so as to not interfere with for audio. And if you have any technical issues or have any questions about accessing the features with this software, please feel free to message me using the chat box, or you can send me an email at admin@calmuseums.org. So now I'm going to pass it off to Joaquin Ortiz, the co-chair of CAM's Strategic Action Committee, to introduce today's presenter.
Thank you, Lacey. I appreciate that. And on behalf of CAM's Strategic Action Committee, who operates our fellowship and scholarship programs, glad to have all of you here today to share with Michaela and her amazing case study. So I want to start our event with a land acknowledgement. As we begin this event, we acknowledge and honor the original inhabitants of our various regions. A land acknowledgement is a critical step towards working with Native communities to secure meaningful partnership and inclusion in the stewardship and protection of their cultural resources and homelands. Our institutions were founded upon exclusions and erasures of Indigenous peoples. We honor and are grateful for the land we occupy and recognize the ongoing damage of settler colonialism. Let's take a moment to honor these ancestral grounds that we are collectively gathered upon and support the resilience and strength that all Indigenous peoples have shown worldwide. I am on the traditional territory of the Kumeyaay peoples. I encourage you to name and acknowledge the Native peoples where you are located in the chat box. Please send it to all panelists and attendees so that way everyone can share the acknowledgement. So we'll leave you a moment to go ahead and make that acknowledgement, please. Everyone, thank you so much for doing that. It means a lot so that we can connect to the Indigenous peoples of our lands. I also need to take a moment to acknowledge our sponsors. The Lunch and Learn program is supported in part by Associated Foundations Incorporated in memory of Barry Herlihy. Live captioning is supported in part by the National Arts and Disability Center at the University of California, Los Angeles, and Ability Central. CAM is supported in part by a grant from the California Arts Council, a state agency. And the CAM Fellowship Program is supported by the Getty Foundation. I want to take a quick moment to acknowledge that we have another program related to today's presentation that will be coming in September. It's going to be called our Green Museum Seminar. And some of the people who were on the call were actually on a call yesterday as we were starting to plan that out. So please keep an eye on our website, social media channels, and newsletter to learn more about that program coming in September. And it will actually be featuring some of the speakers that Michaela will be speaking about today. So those of you who want to get more extended education or experience more about these topics, please keep an eye out for that. It's going to be an exciting online program. With that, I'd like to introduce our speaker today. So each year, CAM Fellows write case studies based on sessions that inspire them at our annual conference. These case studies are highlighted as published articles on our website and as part of this Lunch and Learn webinar series. Today, I will introduce our presenter, CAM 2020 Fellow, Michaela Bailey. Michaela Bailey is a joint curatorial fellow between the Studio Museum in Harlem within the exhibitions department and MoMA. Bailey was a contributing writer for the Studio Museum exhibition Dozi Kanu, function and co-organizer of the winter 2020 season of Harlem postcards at the Studio Museum in Harlem. Bailey is currently a primary researcher for This Longing Vessel, the 2019-20 Artist in Residence culminating exhibition at MoMA's PS1. Michaela, welcome today. Glad to have you here. Please take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Today I'm going to be speaking about the panel, Cultural Responses to Disaster, the Puerto Rico Story. The CAM 2020 panel, Cultural Responses to Disaster, featured panelists from 3 different backgrounds who initiated an institutional model for a response after natural catastrophe. This panel was moderated by Michaela Gallagher, who's here today, the Director of Education and Environmental Programs at the Annenberg Foundation Trust at Sunnylands in California. The multidisciplinary session consisted of a panel that comprised of speakers from both Puerto Rico and on the mainland US. The speakers included 2 museum leaders, Mariana Ramirez Aponte and Billy Ocasio, and 1 university professor, Ricia Ann Chansky-Santanito. The panelists shared concrete examples of what their community's needs were after the hurricanes, and also provided advice for how other institutions can anticipate similar needs in the aftermath of a climatological disaster. So Hurricane Maria was the first hurricane to hit Puerto Rico since 1932. Hurricane Irma occurred from September 5th through 7th, 2017, and Hurricane Maria occurred on September 20th, 2017. So disaster and neoliberal economic policy. In today's political climate, individuals and nonprofits are increasingly left to provide what once were considered basic government services. All of the panel participants touched on the lack of support and care coming from within the government infrastructure, Puerto Rico's ongoing debt crisis, and US colonialism, which exacerbated the need to find alternate structures to fill the gap that's left by a shrunken social safety net. So what is a second responder? As second responders, institutions can identify and address urgent community needs in the aftermath of a crisis. So first responders, they go into an event and they carry out immediate life-saving measures. In the context of Puerto Rico, cultural institutions and the university functioned as command centers and also as community space. So they provided both humanitarian aid and immaterial resources. And these institutions often played a critical role in correcting national media representation, or media misrepresentation, I should say, of the devastation wrought by the hurricanes and of the needs of the people. So a second responder does things like provide communal space, they ask the right questions, they understand the value of voicing and witnessing, and they continually practice sustained engagement and amplification of voices. Second responders engage with community members as equal stakeholders. They often bridge the gap between various entities in order to provide aid. And most crucially, they advocate for structural change. So this first case study is of the University of Puerto Rico at Miles, and it really underscores the value of voicing and witnessing after a collective crisis. So as an autobiography studies scholar, Dr. Ricia Ann Chansky-Santanito, who is professor of literature at the university, saw the effect of collective trauma from the hurricanes in real time in her classrooms. On top of lack of essential supplies, students' lived experiences of the hurricanes were largely ignored by mainstream media. And to quote Professor Santanito, when starting the project, she said, "We didn't know what we were doing when we started it. We just knew that something had to happen." For Professor Santanito, her response and her action took the form of a kind of mass listening, where she engaged 150 students in a public humanities oral history project called Mi Maria, Puerto Rico after the hurricane. Mi Maria is the result of the impulse to fight government erasure. It's also the result of taking responsibility and the knowledge that trauma cannot be separated from the classroom. Educators, they stood up and as the voice who can say, like, that the voice of students matters as much as the other peer-reviewed texts that are being used in the classroom. So Me Maria was really a real-time research project. It activated and empowered students to function as citizen researchers who amplified their existing connections within their communities. Sharing stories means the world to people, and the Me Maria project resulted in a multifaceted form of storytelling, which included photography, story maps, and radio broadcasts. And this project was eventually compiled into a book and will circulate as an exhibition. This exhibition is bilingual and explains the history of colonialism that is digestible to a variety of audiences. A central question for universities in times of crisis is this: to treat students as equal partners in real-time research. So a wonderful example of this is that within the project, there was a narrative that they received from a Head Start teacher. And this teacher explained, what it was like to go back to the classroom on her first day back after the hurricane. As the 4-year-old children whom she taught crowded around her desk, they said things like, "Teacher, I have no food. Teacher, I have no water. I don't have a home. What do I do?" Because of that narrative, one student then became interested in strategies to respond to children in crisis after communal trauma. The student interviewed a social worker, a librarian, and a scholar of children's literature, and this work resulted in the production of an illustrated bilingual children's book that responded to this question. This book was submitted to Arte Publico Press and will be published through its children's imprint. A second case study on the panel was that of the Museum of Contemporary Art of Puerto Rico, also known as the MAC. And this case study and Marianne Ramirez-Aponte's work within the institution provides a really rich example of the practice of sustained engagement and amplifying community voices. So in the weeks following Hurricane Maria, the MAC became a control center. It was a major resource for those who were seeking aid after the storm. It became a center for relief distribution and a place where people gathered to fill out FEMA forms. It also offered access to its Artist Emergency Fund, which was something that had been established in 1997. And this allowed for artists to receive financial assistance, which is actually extremely important because often artists who work informally don't qualify for emergency relief. And so Marianne, who is the executive director of the museum, she also contacted a lawyer and 5 volunteers to help artists fill out 8 applications. This is also in addition to helping the general population. So it's a really amazing example of how you can provide relief to the community and also provide relief that is specific to the cultural sector. In addition to that, the MAC also offered programming to students who were coming in with their parents or students who had, just lost their academic routines because of the power outages and the destruction that was caused by the hurricane. So this sort of art camp experience functioned, as a sort of therapy, art therapy, and they were also able to provide free lunch and other services to families. So what made these community partnerships possible and effective was that, the MAC's response was rooted in longstanding community partnerships and a continued practice of sustained engagement and amplifying voices. Communities trusted the MAC because the museum had long been a facilitator of community projects. The museum also made a point of not just, doing their own projects, but actually accepting proposals or accepting things that would meet and fill community need. So I think engaging with communities as, on an equal level is a really amazing strategy that can be implemented widely. In order to truly serve a community, a museum has to break from the false distinction between, art and life and politics. To quote Marianne Ramirez-Aponte on MAC's response, "We needed to become the museum that our community needs." This image on the left is from an event where the MAC hosted information sessions for artists. Again, a crucial aspect of their success was their longstanding relationships. Since 2014, the MAC has carried out a program called El MAC in El Barrio, which basically, because of this initiative, when the hurricanes came, they had the infrastructure and the trust that allowed them to communicate with different groups. So they were not starting from scratch. The museum is also a voice of the cultural sector in various mutual aid groups that address issues ranging from education to food and housing needs and gender relations. So to paraphrase Marianne once more, because the art we present reflects everything that is going on around us, the engaged museum should touch all parts of life that inspire art itself. My third and final case study is that of the National Museum of Puerto Rican Arts and Culture. And I was able to speak to Billy Ocasio, who is the CEO at the museum. And I was really struck by the way that this museum has modeled both immediate and extended support in the months and years following the hurricanes, and how they've engaged as a part of the diaspora. So the devastation of Hurricane Maria, it occurred in September 2017. And this actually happened on the day before the annual gala that was held by the museum. And in rapid, agile response, Billy Ocasio was able to amend and expand the museum's fundraising plan for the event. And that flexibility allowed supporters such as Rita Moreno and Lin-Manuel Miranda to offer bespoke benefits to donors, such as a home-cooked meal for 10 at Rita's home and a backstage Hamilton package. So these donations allowed for approximately 20 mission trips to happen after the hurricanes. In order to contribute to the long-term goals of rebuilding the island's creative economy, Ocasio also established an initiative called Proyecto Artesano y Más in May of 2018. And this is a model where the museum would purchase one-of-a-kind works of artisans that are based in Puerto Rico and then sell them in the shop. So you kind of have a revolving fund model where money is both going in to the island when the works are purchased, and then coming back, and being redistributed after people buy the work from the store. And finally, the image on this slide is from a recent project that the museum did in the wake of the current pandemic. They have been able to offer artists a stipend to put together anywhere from a 10 to 30-minute long art class. So this video features an English narration of a children's book by a theater group in Puerto Rico called Y No Había Luz, or And There Was No Light. Again, as a museum of the diaspora, Billy was able to respond to the needs of his community and provide an English translation of this book, which is called The Mango Tree Sentinel. So, starting the conversation, to paraphrase Michaela Gallagher, is the museum a part of the community or is it not? Museums need to learn to challenge their mission to directly address the world around them. They need to engage with communities on their terms, and that engagement needs to be both collaborative and sustained. Institutions need to move past one-off programs that create a surface level engagement. And unfortunately, while our government infrastructure is as such, museums also have a responsibility to see what they can do to subvert austerity measures that are, in place due to our political climate. Okay, so what can institutions do in order to respond to disaster? Unlike the institutions that I've cited in this case study, not every institution is culturally specific or able to tap into a diasporic need. But as we have seen in the past few months, collective trauma can happen to any population, anywhere, at any time. And so again, in the contents of Puerto Rico, the institutions were able to function as command centers, communal space, and sources for aid, and often immaterial resources as well. So a question to ask is, what might it look like for your institution to function as a community command center during crisis? What might it look like for your institution to begin to establish community relationships now? And so to start this process, it's important to talk to leadership, to start a conversation about what mutual aid might look like on an institutional level. And there are also easy kind of ready-made strategies that one can take, you know, like proposing to allocate a portion of a museum store and a portion of profits from, you know, what is sold to a certain cause. I'm going to conclude with some disaster preparedness strategies that I learned in the dialogue lunch following the panel. And as a, you know, member of the cloud generation, it was really instructive for me to realize that it's very important to have physical copies of documents on hand for disaster preparedness. It's also important to assign a disaster preparedness team and to practice your plan regularly. Institutions should have a waterproof, printed emergency plan that is placed in multiple locations, so both on and off site. Also, you know, grant materials should be able to be accessed offline. And it's crucial to identify relevant community contacts and again, to establish community relationships now. So in conclusion, I'd like to thank all the panelists and people, and Makayla, the moderator, who took time to speak with me and allow me to prepare this presentation. So thank you to Makayla Gallagher, to Euricia Ann Chansky-Santanito, to Marianne Ramirez-Aponte, and to Billy Ocasio. We're now going to open up the presentation to a discussion and Q&A portion. Thank you.
Thank you, Michaela. Panela says, thank you so much for this great presentation in the chat. So yeah, thank you so much, Michaela, for your case study. And as Michaela just said, we'll open it up to other folks. You can unmute yourself if you have a question or a comment or a story to share or if you feel more comfortable in the chat, we are welcome to use the chat as well.
I also just want to point out that Makayla and Marianne are here, and I'm so excited to have them here. So thank you for taking the time.
I just want to say, Michaela, that the capturing that you did of both the panel and that lunch and learn is so wonderfully concise. I mean, you captured all the main points. So I commend you. This is the first time I've seen the final project. So thank you for capturing the information in that way. It's really wonderfully done.
One part that was particularly powerful for me was the quote you shared from Marianne about becoming the museum that the community needs. And, you know, I think that just, of course, resonates in times of crisis, which we all are currently in.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I was struck by was the max efforts that, you know, that have been continuing, and even the way that, you know, the institution has responded to the current crisis by, you know, making educational resources available and just continuing their amazing work. Yeah, so that response definitely continues.
Mm-hmm.
This is a question for maybe Michaela, Micheline, and Marianne in different ways, but I'm wondering what lessons, because this presentation was done before the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm curious for all three of you to maybe answer this question from your own perspectives of, you know, what is the major differences between what was experiencing during those hurricanes, what the response was, and what the response is now for the COVID-19.
Well, I go first. Hi, everyone, and Michaela, thank you so much for doing this, and Micheline for thinking of us, you know, in the first time. Well, basically, I think it is very important, and something that we have been able to do differently this time is that I have been getting more and more involved in other sorts of organizations from the nonprofit sector that provide other kinds of services in education, in health, people with diverse functionality, survivors of gender violence, etc. So what we have been doing this time is that you know, there's an official government appointed task force to deal with financial issues and, of course, you know, the public health crisis. So we, with this group of nonprofits, created like a task force, a social task force, to deal with the issues that have not been taken care of by the government. And within that group, I advocated for the creation of a committee to deal with the arts and culture sector, because usually we are pretty much invisible, you know, when this sort of emergencies, you know, happen. And the experience gained, you know, through, you know, when the hurricanes came, and then at the beginning of the years, I'm sorry, that's my dog. The beginning of the year, we also had earthquake activity here in Puerto Rico, which also has been ongoing. So it has been like a crisis on top of a crisis. So I'm sorry. I'll be right back. So I think that for us, it has been very important to be in close connection with these other organizations. And this has been something that we have been doing for quite some time. I don't know if you're aware, but in Puerto Rico, we are also dealing with a financial crisis. So I have been the museum director for the past 12 years, and very early on, I thought that we had to get in touch, you know, with these multiple realities that coexist in Puerto Rico, and the way to do that was learning, you know, about the different communities, their needs, and seeing, you know, ways in which we could collaborate with these other organizations to, you know, to be able to move forward, to think of how best to develop, you know, Puerto Rico in so many different aspects. But this particular situation now with the COVID, we have been doing these public hearings through Facebook Live, and it has been like a great strategy. We have had thousands of people connecting. So I think that it's a great way to, amidst, you know, all of the political situation in Puerto Rico, to construct and to build political power, to, you know, to be able, you know, to be heard, and for all of these marginalized communities to have a voice, because again, you know, it's not only the arts and culture that we are always, you know, working and struggling for the government to see our sector as an essential services sector. But right now, you know, many, and the same thing I know happens in the States, because I read about it in the news, you know, many people are falling behind. And so we are continually, you know, struggling for that not to happen. And I've always thought of, you know, the museum as a great resource and tool. You know, if you have the strategy, you are able to move things forward. So that's part of what we have been doing differently. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I would say that, you know, thinking back of when this panel was done, the day we left the CAM conference was the day that LA announced their first shelter in place. So it just, the timeline from then to now is so many things have occurred. So watching Puerto Rico and talking with Billy, and now reconnecting for the next project with Marianne and Richia has been really exciting, because if you look at Puerto Rico as an example, that is almost the worst case scenario. It's when you're on an island. When we first started looking at this panel, it was actually to discuss the effect on cultural institutions of migration during extreme weather events. And after our first conversation, we decided we had a much better panel in just focusing on Puerto Rico and the resiliency and what they were able to do. And so they're a wonderful example of what we should be doing right now, which is planning for the possibility of the next fire, the next earthquake. I mean, Southern California, I'm in the middle of the Sonoran Desert. We're overdue for a major earthquake that could completely cut us off from any major metro areas. So these are things that I think institutions fail to recognize when we're in our planning stages. We wait for something to happen and then we react to what's happening. And with a lot of the conversations of social justice, environmental justice, and institutional leadership, now there's the conversation that we have to stop being reactive and find ways to think this through. And so that's what I think the Puerto Rico story really taught us was they captured the things that they hadn't thought of, but they also captured the ability to pivot very quickly and be creative and be responsive to their community, using plan A, plan B, and plan C, when knowing plan C is probably the one you're going to have to implement. And so I was in awe of what they were able to do with the resources and the lack of support that they saw, as well as the media barrage of negative messaging that was going on. So they're just a perfect example, as far as I'm concerned, of what museums should have been doing and should be doing now. The hope with this panel was that we would get museums also to start talking about, as we move forward and through this time, is to be second responders to each other, and to think of, if you are in a safe zone when an extreme weather event happens somewhere else, what can you contribute? And that was Billy's example. And he's continuing to do that in an incredibly generous manner. But something as small as what Michaela mentioned about dedicating, you know, a shelf or two in your store with messaging that this is happening in Puerto Rico, this is happening in Northern California with the fires, this is happening here, and the proceeds for this section are going to go to help relief in those museums. There's so many little things that if you get your entire team, and that's, you know, all different levels in the organization, from the maintenance and the operations team to the younger members on your staff, to HR, to everybody, to just put that on the table and say, if this happens, what would we do? What can we do? What do we want to do? And that's where I think we're still struggling, and we still don't do it. It's a push even within my own institution. So I think a lot of us struggle with getting our institutions to embrace that type of conversation because there's so many other things that we have to focus on.
Thank you, Marianne and Micheline, for sharing more. We are past the end time for this program, and we're so grateful to all of you for joining. Michaela, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, just thank you to everyone. Yeah, I hope we can continue this conversation in many ways.
Thank you, Michaela. For those who are still on, I will just share one more piece of news from CAM. This is the final fantastic webinar. Thank you again, Michaela, in a series that we've had the past couple weeks. But we do have most of the recordings of the past programs up on our website. The URL is at the bottom there, where you can see all of the recordings. If you're interested, we encourage you to take a look. And as Joaquin mentioned at the beginning, we will have our Green Museum seminar at some point in September, which will feature Marianne's story and the Puerto Rico story update as well. So we're so excited about that. And with that, I'm going to thank you again. Thank you, Michaela, and I hope everyone takes care and has learned a lot from today. I know I have.